Hi, I'm Tanya Janca, and I'm your host today of the Bright webinar. And I'm here with Eric. Eric, could you just tell everyone about yourself and your company and everything? Just introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Eric Sheridan. I'm a managing member over at Infrared Security. We're a company that specializes in helping educate and helping organizations build the skill sets needed to write and produce more secure software. So very education focused. My background personally, I've been in application security for over 17 years. I come from a more technical background, product development. I'm grateful to say I have like 14 patents in developing technologies in this space. So if you want to geek out anytime, would love to. With that said, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity, Tanya, to speak with you and be a part of this webinar. It's a great community, a lot of fun, and honestly, this will be a very fun conversation today.
Awesome. So, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Tanya Janca, and I work at Bright. And I'm also the founder of We Hack Purple, a community about application security. And so when I met Eric, I was like, oh my gosh, obviously, we're both really obsessed with like helping teach others and make the world a more secure place, especially the software. And so I was just like, how can we find an excuse to work together as soon as possible?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and Bright makes a dynamic web app scanner. So I joke that we do pew pew, but it's more than that. We try to find lots of vulnerabilities and then show you how to fix them. And yeah, and it's really software developer focused. And so, yeah, we have a lot of claims to fame. And at some point in the chat, we're going to invite you to Bright's online community, which is a Discord server. And it's named Bright, as you might imagine, like Bright Community. And anyway, I will leave that till later, but oh, there we go. Thank you. Amanda reads my mind. Okay, so this webinar is called The Unintended Consequences of DevOps. Eric, what are we talking about? Like, why are there unintended consequences?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is a topic that hits near and dear to my heart, having seen customers experience it for so long. In 2011, a gentleman named Mark Andreessen wrote an article called "Software is Eating the World." And the general premise was like, hey, software is everywhere. It's going to drive our lives, do all these really cool things. And so, in my mind, like, that's like the great promise of software, which is cool. With that said, I'm also a slightly paranoid, slightly cup is half empty, however you want to put it, type of person. And so I looked at that and said, look, great people write software that come with great intents, but we people, we make mistakes. We're human, right? And so if software is going to be running our lives and people are making software, we run the risk of having insecure software eating the world. So that's my great concern. Now, unfortunately, there's been a little bit of validation of that concern of mine over the years. If you look at a lot of the annual stats reports that various friends in this space will put out, you'll see stats like it takes over 180 days to fix a critical vulnerability. So that's time to fix. So the moment the vulnerability is discovered to when it's actually fixed and pushed to production is over 180 days. And so from my experience, my perspective, everything I've seen, and then Tanya, in conversations with you prior to this, it sounds like you're experiencing similar situations. For me, that is the unintended consequence of DevOps. The adoption of DevOps has unfortunately led to organizations pushing vulnerabilities faster to production than ever before.
I agree. I agree so much. It's So I'm a nerd and I was a developer a lot longer than I did security. And so when I discovered DevOps and basically like I love automating things in my life at work, etc., I was like, this is the best ever. But I also from a security perspective, I like, oh, we've got a lot less time to work with now. If they're going to release 10 times a day or used to like 2 releases a year, like we've got to figure out a new way to do this. I have this friend named Imran Mohammed, and he runs a company called Practical DevSecOps. I really like his use of the word practical because he's like, I don't say perfect, right? And he was saying, he's like, So us AppSec folks, we still want what we've always wanted, right? We still want secure software. It's just we have to adjust ourselves if we're working in a DevOps environment. And so that can mean new tools, or it can mean like, scheduling things in different ways than we used to, right? Like if they're doing sprints, we have to learn to do part of our work in sprints as much as we can. And so would you say that with a lot of companies adopting DevOps, that there's sort of like pressure on the security team, like with the program guys?
Yeah, and it's really a result of the security teams indirectly, now directly feeling the pressure that's been on the development teams for a number of years now. A really good illustration of that for me is Google has this team called the DevOps Research and Assessment, DORA. And so this team, every year we'll put out this DevOps, annual stats report. And in there, they have these 4 metrics designed to measure software delivery performance. I'll just read them out loud. You got lead time for changes, deployment rates, change failure rates, and time to restore service. So like you got these 4 metrics that are being placed on DevOps teams to measure their performance. And the underlying theme of all of them is really speed, right? Like how fast can you do all of this stuff? And so when you introduce security testing into that, now the teams who are responsible for security and security testing and working with development teams are now
Mm-hmm.
feeling that pressure and have been for a while. And so that's really hard. And if you don't have the right skill sets, like understanding vulnerabilities, how to fix them, all the little, I play chess. I'm terrible at it, but I play chess. And so like when you play chess, you can fall into traps when you make moves. Same thing with fixing vulnerabilities, right? You could think you fixed it, you make a mistake, it reverts the fix, and you're basically back to square one. So these software teams are under all this pressure to move fast. The security teams are under pressure to better support the software teams and are now feeling that pressure. And without the skills and the right tools, that's when this unintended consequence of DevOps really surfaces, the pushing vulnerabilities faster to production. So it's hard. It's a hard dynamic to experience.
I agree, Eric. I'm wondering if the audience agrees. So you and I are both biased because both of us founded startups that try to educate everyone about how to create more secure software because we're both really passionate about that. But I'd like to ask everyone in the chat, do you agree that basically if you're going to start doing DevOps, that there needs to be more education like at work so they can teach you like this is how you do the secure layer, this is how this tool works. Like, do you think that it's the employer's responsibility to provide education, or should everyone just learn it on their own? Like, I'd love to hear what the audience thinks because as much as like, I believe it to be true, I'm biased. I'm really biased, Eric. Like when I was a software developer, they would like give me software development training every year, at least once a year or a whole bunch. And then I moved into security and they're like, oh, security training's too expensive. You can't have any. I'm like, what? The person in charge of making sure things are safe to use, you don't want to teach me how?
Right. Yeah. And you and I were speaking about this topic before, and you had a way that you phrased it. So I'll try not to say it exactly because I can't recall exactly how you said it, but I loved it. It was along the lines of like, you want people in your organization that want to learn more. And figuring out how to support that is a good problem to have, because the harder problem is having people in your organization that don't want to learn, don't want to grow. Like, how is that any better? So yeah, I'm completely biased as well for that very reason.
There's some comments in the chat. So I agree without the right skills and tools, it can be hard. I agree with more education, employer as well on their own. Yes, I think it speaks to a larger issue of software developers to understand their supply chains. Yeah, I definitely, that has come really up front and center since last December with Log4j. It's mainly project managers who want to deploy the feature fast to satisfy customer and respect deadlines. Yeah, I agree with that too. I read out the chat things a lot because we tend to, so we have a certain number of people show up live, but we actually usually have 5 or 10x people watch or listen to the recording later. So when I read out the stuff in the chat, that's why it's for them. I know all of you can see it and all of you are quite literate. Just so you know, I'm reading it for people later. So someone was saying, most definitely, I think more education is needed, and it needs to start at the top of the companies. I've seen it firsthand that bottom up doesn't tend to work as well, and it can fail. I feel like it's not just the dev team that needs education on this, but the wider company. So marketing, sales, management, product managers, project managers. I could make an argument for training for everyone. Yeah, I agree with that too. Security is changing all the time. Eric, you and I have to keep learning, right? Like we have to keep learning.
Yeah. I mean, with the technology evolving as much as it has, I mean, you went from like these classic monolithic applications. Now you have distributed microservices, infrastructures, code, hybrid, cloud native environments, Web 3.0, and insert acronym here. Like, you got to stay up to date with this stuff. And I appreciate the comments too, because like they've validated a lot of my experiences. The bottom up, the more passive approach doesn't work well, because every you'd like to believe and want to believe that everybody in the organization wants to choose, to take a course or do something as a means of, for education. But if there's competing pressures tied directly to dollars and cents, i.e. their paycheck, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So I don't blame that person for choosing something else over the education piece. But if it's top down, if it's a cultural shift, that makes the biggest difference. And so, Tanya, what's nice is I know you called out correctly, so that you and I are incredibly biased on this. But the most recent State of DevOps report that was released by Dora
Mhm.
actually said the biggest predictor of an organization's app dev security practices was cultural, not technical. So, like, we're in pretty good standing with that statement.
I agree. And so someone in the chat agrees. So DevOps is more about culture than technology. Yes, of course, we want to implement all the super cool tools, but education on the culture and becoming a true student of DevOps will help every team. I 100% agree. So you and I were talking, so Eric and I met a few months ago, and then we've been nerding out ever since. And you were talking about up to the minute knowledge education. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So it's funny. A while back, we interviewed a number of developers, trying to understand, hey, look, what are your pressures? What are you going through, and so forth. And probably, in response to the question of like, what are you trying to do most, or what is your greatest concern? To nobody's surprise, the number one answer we got back was, I want to close the ticket. I want to close the ticket so I can go home, have dinner with my family and go watch some cool show, right?
Yeah.
So in that environment, when you have that, like, hey, I want to close out the ticket quickly, and you have a DevOps environment that puts so much pressure on you, it is getting harder and harder and harder to ask anybody, let alone developers, to step away from their day job to go spend dedicated time in some, in a course, right? And so, based on that fact, that's one reason why, at Infra, we're putting serious effort in condensing our courses to be shorter and more direct, right? No fluff. Like, let's get to the point.
Mhm.
So that's one fact. Then the other is, if I'm getting vulnerabilities presented to me as a part of my daily workflow, right? So like,
Mhm.
let's say I'm a Bright customer, I'm getting vulnerabilities fed to me, as a part of my build pipeline. A ticket was created. I got to close that thing out. um, I don't have time to step away to go practice fixing vulnerabilities in Juice Shop or some other fictitious lab environment, right? That doesn't move the needle on how my team's being measured. What
Mhm.
actually moves the needle is me fixing the vulnerability in my code as quickly as possible. And
Mhm.
so education really needs to accommodate that. We need to have the ability to make education a daily part of the developer's routine. And a great example of that is, if I'm presented a vulnerability in my code, teach me how to fix that vulnerability in my code as quickly as possible so I can close out that ticket and move forward.
Yeah.
If you're successful at that, you you as a security team get to support that software delivery performance metric and set of metrics that DORA pushes out, while also supporting your goals of reducing risk within the organization.
Absolutely. So I wasn't supposed to just talk about Bright the whole time, but um, so when you find a vulnerability with our tool, it gives you some instructions on how to mitigate it. It's not a formal lesson like what you provide, but it's like, here's this, here's some references, here's places where you can go and learn and read more. But I agree with you. Like, let's say they read the instructions. So you're supposed to do output encoding that would solve this problem. But if they don't know how to do output encoding, knowing where to go and find that answer, because sometimes the reason why the mitigation isn't there because they didn't know it exists or they don't know how to do it. Like
Right.
there's lots of programming languages I programmed in. I don't know every single function that exists. I'm not magic. And so being able to just go to a system, look it up, and get an actual lesson, that sounds kind of awesome.
Yeah, because I mean, they're very traditionally speaking, they're like very siloed technologies, capabilities, and like
Mhm.
they need to merge. They need to come together to have the maximize the benefit of the developer as a part of their daily workflow. So, um, yeah, and what's nice about that is, again, once again, I'm biased, but Dora supports me in this. Dora actually noted that when people adopt these types of security practices and that cultural adopt that cultural mindset, they have an increase in the adoption of security practices in general and reduce developer burnout. If you're trying to keep key talent within an organization, particularly developers, burnout is an absolute killer. And so the unintended consequence that we talked about earlier leads to burnout all the time, and Dora supports that. So by having this, integrated daily experience, so they can get what they need when they need it most to fix the vulnerability, helps in software delivery, which indirectly helps reduce things like burnout.
So we have some comments in the chat and someone disagrees, and I really like it when people disagree because then I learn something new. And so I disagree. Things like OWASP GShop are just priming the mental pipes to look at these vulnerabilities and these patterns, a break to fix your mentality, but it doesn't last long. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I see that. And then we have more comments. So a developer life work today is all about closing tickets. I suggested my team to add security aspect and acceptance criteria in each story, but it ended up frustrating the team that had to handle the new things they weren't used to doing. Yeah, I agree. That is hard, especially if there's not kind of like job shadowing or some sort of support that they have. So sometimes you can take a course and learn how to do the thing, but if you're not doing that, it's like, what can you do to help make sure they understand what's needed of them? And so there's another one. I think pre-commit hooks and IDE plugins help provide that immediate feedback and education as the developer develops. So the developer programs the code may help, but scaling and managing IDE plugins at a workstation can be really challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to pull this off, integration is the biggest technical challenge. I think you hit that out directly. So, what is the primary tool set being used by your team? What are the integration points, and how do you pull it off? And the answer to that will be different based on all the tool set, the technologies, the vendors that you use. But at the end of the day, if you can come up with a plan to pull that off, you're going to find yourself in a much better position.
Yeah. So there is more comments. So a break-in mentality will only give you just enough knowledge to fix the problem of that day. Sometimes that's the thing you need to do, right? Like you just need to get past this ticket because you have a deadline on Friday. But sometimes you want to have a deeper knowledge that lasts longer, and then it can be repetition that gives that to you or applying it in different contexts. What do you think? Like, how can we make sure they don't just know the answer today, that over time they learn?
That is a great observation. And I'm going to use that as a segue to another topic I wanted to speak about. So this concept of having like education integrated into the daily workflow is not necessarily something I'm arguing should be the only approach or the norm. Actually, I am arguing it's the norm, but rather that alone is not enough. And I think this question calls it out directly. You know, if we integrate into the daily workflow, the education is going to be very, more often than not, will be very focused on issues that are either like true or false. Like,
Mhm.
this is how you do it, this is how you don't do it, right? But there are bigger topics, bigger issues in security that don't necessarily fit out of those, you know, yes or no, true or false type of situations. um, Things like authentication, access control, design patterns. Secure design patterns is in the most recent OWASP top 10. Software supply chain, you know, you mentioned that earlier. We actually released a course on that earlier this year. Incredibly popular and an incredibly non 0 1 true or false type of topic, but that, you know, these are the types of things that people need to know. And so for me, the I like to try and get the benefits of both. You have like a formal education curriculum speaking to these topics across many technologies and languages and so forth. And you also have the integrated daily workflow education piece. Um, and what's cool is like they can kind of feed on each other, right? So like if you have, you know, the bite-sized education fed in, you're teaching people how to close out that cross-site scripting vulnerability as quickly as possible. But if you find that team or that the people working on that project are frequently introducing vulnerabilities, you know, however you track that, whatever platform you use, that could be the data that you need to say, oh, you know, I want that team to go through maybe a more formal training curriculum because there's a lot of sort of fundamental understanding that we need to build. Um, so yeah, a more complete program is not just about the daily workflow. There is this wider industry and set of topics that we need to be aware of.
So I have another question, and I forgot to tell the audience you are allowed to ask questions too. I'm sorry, I totally forgot. I'm just asking questions of them.
Yep.
Um, so what do we do to keep on top of trends? So I feel like a big trend in the past 12 months is software supply chain because of Log4j. And although I'm sad that the Log4j thing happened and it was quite stressful and I had to do a lot of overtime, um, it really brought supply chain security issues and like vulnerable dependencies to light in a way where I could talk to anyone about it because suddenly people are paying attention. And so that was like a big obvious way. But rather than having giant disasters, are there other ways that we could stay informed of industry trends, I guess, is what I want to say.
Yeah. And so I'll answer this. You know, Tanya, I know you have experience in this space, so I'm passing the question back. I would love to hear your perspective. I'll try and answer that from the perspective of some of the developers that we work with, and in supporting them. Our customers, our buyers tend to be the dedicated security teams, and so they're the ones that have the pulse on the industry, and they do that through, you know, engagements with webinars like this or various communities that are out there, and are on top of things like software supply chain security. Um, what I've seen help with them sort of disperse that knowledge within the organization is making, you know, frequent internal webinars or other sort of campaigns, if you will, to raise awareness on these topics, often in the form of like a security champions program. So either having, you know, representatives on the security team once a month, perhaps inviting development teams once a month, carrying out internal webinars, or on Slack channels, sending out links and resources once a week, once a day, whatever cadence makes sense for that organization, sharing this information. And to that end, one of the things that we've done with the content that we create is, you know, talked about sort of this concept of integrating education to the development work, the daily workflow. We actually did that in our product by breaking up into like these educational bite-sized videos. Some of our folks actually send out like videos within like Slack channels and stuff like that to kind of keep this content fresh. And so what's cool about that is, you know, if you're in the business or internally within your organization or as a vendor creating educational content, there is value in delivering bite-sized, quick pieces of content and delivering it fast, as opposed to trying to build this comprehensive stuff. Because if you have that capability, which is almost reactive in some sense, It'll allow you to speak to industry trends like software supply chain within your organization much faster. So that I've seen that work for the folks I worked with. Tanya, I'd be curious, given your experience in this space, what you see work.
So I find a lot of so I've been working with a lot of clients over the past couple of years to start and build their security champions programs, and I'm like really passionate about that. So when you said it, I was like, ooh. Um, so like when I started my first AppSec program, Eric, I didn't know what a security champions program was, and I accidentally made one. Like I wanted everyone to scan their web apps with a DAST, and so I got a DAST. I learned how to use it. I showed all of them how to use it. I told them, I'm really concerned because I keep finding vulnerabilities that are, these OWASP people say they're bad news, and so I'm like, we need to fix them. And so very quickly there was just one person on each team who sort of self-identified as the person who was my point of contact. And so just very quickly it was like, oh, it's Liam or Stefan or whoever the person was who was the most interested. And so then I would teach that person the most. Then eventually it's like I just have meetings with this one person. They handle all the security things for their team and they're awesome, and help me get my job done. And so that really helped. So if I want to stay on top of industry trends, I read a lot of blogs. I follow a lot of people. I'm on a lot of newsletters like TLD or SEC, so too long, didn't read, security. And he just summarizes like a ton of blogs every week, and it's awesome. So I'll read his summaries, and then I'm like, okay, these two, I want to read the whole thing. And I found that very helpful. I also listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
And those things help me figure out what it is I want to dive deeper into. I also like create a lot of content. And then if you're going to do content, I like to read up on all the things. And, I like to quote others' work a lot, which is probably good. Um, and so then I'm reading this and that, and all of a sudden it comes together, and I've finished the article and I know way more about it than when I started writing. But not everyone learns by teaching others, but that's a way that really works for me.
Yeah.
For a company though, so for instance, when I wanted to teach everyone about the DAS scanner, I started with, okay, so there's, 300 of you and one of me, and I don't have enough time each day to do everything. So I need your help. And I tried to get across to them, I can't do this without you. Like you're
Yeah.
our first line of defense, not me. Like they see your app and your code long before it gets to the security team. Like if it's out there on the internet, they're interacting with your work, not mine. And so I need to kind of build all of you up and build all of your knowledge up and your defenses by giving you tools that you can use. And so um, I know we talked a lot about the unintended consequences of DevOps, of people not having a lot of knowledge that could help them do better. But we also like briefly talked about, and I kind of want to talk about a little more, tools that are changing over time, basically.
Yeah.
So like you and I both know, so the tools that were available in 2001 were basically non-existent. And then 2011, there's a bunch of tools, and now it's almost 2023. And this year, I think like what, 50 new startups that talk about API security. Like, how do we even choose? So I want to put in the chat, I want you to ask questions about new security tools and like what interests you or what you want us to talk about. But Eric, how are you seeing the tools changing over time? Like, or do you see a change in the tools, or is it the same as it's always been?
It's funny. Both. Um, you may have hit Pandora's box with me on this topic, which is great. Uh, let's see. Oh, with the adoption of DevOps and this unintended consequence, which stems from all this pressure and speed placed on developers, that was then it also placed on security teams to deliver results faster. And so what we had for many years were, I'll just call them legacy tools, that um, I would best describe as like, you point it somewhere, you click a button, in a couple weeks, maybe even a month, you get some report back, maybe a PDF, and you just kind of toss it, you generally speaking, toss it over the wall for the other team to do something with, right? That flat out fails in a DevOps world. Don't even bother trying. If you do, you're in a world of pain. I'm sure Tanya will be there to answer your call when you're ready. But there are, with the tools, those legacy tools kind of recognize that, and from a marketing perspective, like they'll adjust how they speak to DevOps and so forth. But what I've seen is the more successful solutions out there are the ones that actually started from the ground up. Started from the ground up. Hey, how do we rethink this technology in this world? We can't continue to Frankenstein something from the 90s and early 2000s thinking it's going to somehow solve today's problems. And so, yes, there's a lot of startups out there, and it is really hard to differentiate. But the startups that are truly beginning from the ground up have the opportunity to help from a tool perspective in this situation. So, like I said, Pandora's box. I'll pause there, Tanya, because I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, so whenever I talk about DevOps, and so I work for a vendor now, but I've never worked for a vendor before, so this is new to me. And so I came up with this list a few years ago because I got asked to keynote a conference that was about DevOps, and I was like, well, I better learn DevOps really fast. And so DevOps, if you read the Phoenix Project, the DevOps Handbook, Accelerate, and now just recently that big group of people that write all those awesome books released the Unicorn Project. And so they sort of have like three rules. So like it has to be fast. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough. It has to be fast. It has to be accurate, and it has to be, I don't want to say easy, but it has to be realistic and doable. So sometimes I see tools where they're like, we do these really advanced attack simulations in production. And I'm like, whoa, what? I am not there yet. That does not sound easy. That sounds like I'm going to find some of my security team crying. We do not want to do this right now. Um, or I'll see tools where it is fast. It runs in only 6 hours. Our competitors run in 8 hours. I'm like, that's not fast. That's not fast for a software developer. Like, come
It's
on.
not the right unit of measure. Hours is not the right unit.
Yes. Yes. And then like the accuracy thing. So I think you mentioned this, and I've had a lot of people mention this. The idea that like false positives breaking the build, everyone freaks out and they go to try to fix the thing and they investigate and then it's not real.
Yeah.
Right. And this is probably going to sound bad, but I did it in my first DevOps project. And I had this open source project and I was working with this really awesome person named Abel. And I put a dynamic scanner in that gives false positives somewhat regularly. Unfortunately, I didn't know that at the time. I have a lot more experience now. And so basically it made a false positive and it said, you have SQL injection. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like freaking out. And then Abel's like, I did not do, no. And then we looked and it was a false positive and we'd ended up spending like the whole evening for nothing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was presenting at a conference the next day. So I was really freaking out. I'm like, my pipeline has to work. Um, and so then another time, like with the same open source project, I was giving a presentation and Abel had pushed some code the night before. And I don't know how he got past the pipeline. He might have disabled my tool. But anyway, so then I go and run it in front of everyone and it breaks. And I was like, oh no, no, my demo's failing. And someone's like, your demo's not failing. It found a high vulnerability and it broke. That's what it should do. And so then together we all looked into it and it was a false positive. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die of embarrassment now. And so when you do that in real production, like people they're not okay with that. Like
No.
it'd be different if it had happened one time, but like this is like a small part-time working on the weekends occasionally project. And I did two like major false positives. And the team's like, hey, so do we need to really have this piece of crap in our pipeline? And I was like, no, it's important. And so yeah, so there's a couple comments in the chat I want to read before I ask you more questions. But so Christine is saying DevOps for Modern Enterprise by Micro Herring is another good book. And so I'm going to take note of that because I actually haven't heard of that book. And then Dawn says there are several tools that verify the findings using an exploit, though. The same tools, app and API scanners promise low, no false positives. Yeah, I agree. Bright makes that promise as well. And I haven't found a false positive with it before, which is really awesome because then people don't get angry at me. Like devs, they're like, why'd you break my build, Tanya? Yeah, I agree with you. So I think that's one of the trends that has changed is that like Eric, when I gave my first talk about AppSec at a big conference, I had said I always start with DAST instead of SAST because SAST has so many false positives. Everyone just gets really angry at me all the time. So I need to use DAST because it's way, way, way more accurate. And so I skip SAST and do like manual code reviews, or I do SAST out of out of bounds, so to speak. So like I'll do it, but I'm not gonna just send the results to dev. I'm like, I have to seek through this and like find the things that really concern me, validate those results, and then make like a mini report to send to them.
Yeah.
Have you seen a change over time though that there's is it in my mind or is it true that it's becoming more accurate and it's improving? Like what do you think?
Um, so I'm very biased with SaaS. I love SaaS technologies. I actually wrote a few. So it depends. It's a question of like, are you using the right tool for the job? In my mind, when SaaS and DaaS were first really out, it was very much one or the other. And so in order to compete at that time, what you saw were like these technologies that were trying to test for everything under the sun. So, on their marketing page, hey, I find, 600 different types of vulnerabilities. I find 601, so I must be better. Right. And so you have a lot of noise.
Mhm.
Um, so, there's areas where one is better than the other. And you kind of need to figure out what that balance is for you and your team and your organization based on your technology stack. With that said, when it comes to DaaS technologies, what I really like, and I think this was just highlighted in the chat, is that you get like the steps to reproduce, right? The exploitability of that. You don't get that with SaaS, right? There's a lot of cool things you can get with SaaS compared to DaaS, but in the context of the unintended consequence of DevOps, if you're going to put something in front of the development team, it needs to be actionable. And I have this saying when I'm doing a sales call, sales presentations, like if you can have a technology that's fast, easy, and accurate, you get a fourth benefit for free, which is scalable, right? And so then you get a scalable technology in place. So yeah, I when it comes to SaaS, you just need to use it for the right pieces. But DaaS will give you the exploitable, actionable results, which in the context of DevOps means that when people act on it, there's a higher probability they're going to act on something real.
So big agree from me. So this will make sense in a minute. So I worked in the Canadian government for 13 and a half years, and then I'm in Ottawa right now, and I went to an Ottawa conference and I saw lots of my friends and people that I know from my many years working in the government. And so we have some questions about government security. And so I'm going to read a few of them in a row so that we can talk about them together. And so first off is so, what about IT shops that work in government? So, civic, state, federal, and this could be America, this could be any country. Um, so, how can some of these InfoSec shops leverage tools that align to their very strict IT security policies? Because they're very heavily regulated. And because they're so heavily regulated, there's a lot and a lot of processes. And so then there's a follow up on that question. And I kind of want to just read all of them and then we can kind of pick out parts and answer it over time, if that makes sense, because there's elaboration. So, how do government DevSecOps show um, break through the centralized IT governance and red tape and start using the right tools and processes? And so there's an answer from Dawn in the chat, but so this might sound bad, but when I was in the government, my number one thing that upset me was the really big processes. Like I remember I wanted to run a DAS scanner and it was a fully automated one like Bright without a fuzzer. So Bright also doesn't have a fuzzer. And what that means is there's no like fuzzing of input validation sort of testing where you could create false records and you could damage things in the database and put things into the database that might be bad. You might be able to crash the app, etc. And so
Yeah.
without a fuzzer, DAST is actually really safe to use. And so I was so annoyed with them that they told me, they're like, well, you can't do a scan without, wait for it, Eric, a 21-step approval process. Wait, had to be approved by someone 5 levels above me. So the deputy director of an entire federal government department had to waste her time reading this stupid, like, 9-page thing that I filled out that she clearly does not care about. She does not have time for my crap, right? And so then I'd have to wait till she had time to sign it. So an emergency scan would take minimum 21 days. And I was just like, this was me, all the time. And I was like, we're not adding value with her signature. We're not adding value when people who don't have anything to do with this application, who aren't monitoring the app, like the 21 steps, most of them aren't adding value. So what if instead we look at what adds value and go from there? And also, like, why don't we pick a tool that's not dangerous? So I have run tools, Eric, when I had less experience and was junior, and they had a fuzzer, and I destroyed the production web server, like, by accident. Like, I used the automated scanning thing and it took down the database and the web server. And I was like, I am so sorry, but and it was because I'd had zero training. And then they just put me out there and like, good luck with that. Um, and so one thing would be to buy safer tools, and more modern tools tend to be a lot more safe because we know. um, that would be like the first suggestion. The other suggestion would be maybe questioning what is the value that is being added by each part of the process. Because there still are things, there are processes that can add value, but it's like, how do we see the value? How do we measure the value we're doing in this process? Does it make sense to have this process at all? And that means having to have real, genuine conversations with management. And I have to say, like, I left government because I found it so frustrating, but I really hope you don't leave because we need people like you. Seriously, Eric, like, I don't want the good ones to leave.
Yeah.
I am a citizen. I still need you to do a good job, please. Do you have some
Yeah.
suggestions?
Um, so I guess, a couple of comments. The first one is, if you are able to go up 5 levels in the organizational charts to get a signature and still keep everybody happy, you probably deserve a raise. So that's pretty cool. And then the other thing I'll highlight is that I have seen some changes from a government perspective over the past couple years, top down, that are hopefully helpful in escalating, the efficiency of some of these initiatives. You had the executive order last year around supply chain security, for example. And then I guess it was a couple of months ago, there was another memo put out around, forcing the adoption of things like, producing SBOMs and so forth. And what's interesting is, like, the turnaround time that organizations, agencies, vendors, and so forth that are expected to deliver on these sorts of, requests is pretty fast. I mean, I think it was like, within 45 days or something along those lines, like they had to have this stuff implemented. And so my hope is that if you, generally speaking, the audience that, or those that can sort of influence policy, if you can put pressure to deliver the outcomes, the value, the outcomes within a certain period of time, I would think that the process that's there to try and deliver that needs to adjust. Right. So I can't wait 21 days to get a sign off to do a test if I have to turn around within 24 days. Right. So, I can't say I have a ton of experience in the federal space, but my hope is if you can influence policy and the deadlines for the outcomes, that would then change the process.
So I'm going to be super biased again. What if we trained the people who are making the policies and approving the policies? Like, what if we taught them what DevOps was? And what if we explained, listen, so I've worked with a lot of teams, like, not just government, but I would say now significantly more private sector. And sometimes, like, they'll be talking about, trying to make the process better or whatnot. And they're like, well, we just can't possibly, give a millimeter, if you run the scan and you're only blocking on criticals and highs, like, a medium could get out. I'm like, you've seen the reports. We have thousands of highs. We have hundreds of criticals in prod right now. What you're doing is making it extremely difficult to fix them. That's the risk to our security, is how long you make it take because of your processes. Like, you're the cause of this risk. And I've had some companies like, oh crap. I'm like, if you make it take 21 days just to run a scan, that means that's 3 more weeks. Everyone's waiting for those results. But also, it's not the first scan I've ran. There's a whole bunch of other bugs that are in there already that we know about. If it's
Yeah.
taking me 3 weeks to run a scan, it's probably taking 3 months to release new code. And that's 90 more days that we're not secure. And it's it's frustrating to see people where, from my viewpoint, they're shooting us in the foot, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, you adding all of these processes to make sure that every single thing is perfect has resulted in it taking so long that we've been vulnerable for an extended period of time.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so like if the audience that you're engaged with, who is, has this process, so forth, is striving to achieve DevOps or has DevOps, their software delivery performance is being measured by the same four metrics I listed earlier. All of this process in these gates, if you will, are negatively impacting that. And so from a security perspective, naturally you just trying to run a security test is going to negatively impact that, because by the time you get permission, by the time you get to run the scan, by the time you get the triage and disseminate the results, oh, you got a whole quarter has passed, right? We got 3 months that are just gone. And so if the goal is to truly get software, high quality software out faster, streamlining this process is essential, and making it more efficient is essential. And actually, when you talk about Bright and doing the security testing, from an efficiency perspective, one of the things I think is pretty cool is like, and I can't speak for you, but I'm going to pretend for a moment and just be honest about it. Bright, like you're running these security tests, you're generating a bunch of data for your customers. That data can be used to make more informed decisions around application security in general. And so, when it comes to having the right tools, like Bright, for example, you getting results fast, that data can be used to help figure out what skills you need to instill in a team as quickly as possible. And so, like, if we're going to talk about efficiency, you got to talk about how to use data to help figure out what skills you need and help to drive that. So going back to one of my earlier statements, overcoming this consequence, this unintended consequence of DevOps requires both the right skills and then the right tools. You can't have one or the other. You have to have both, and you need to be able to play well together.
I completely agree. There's two more comments in the chat I wanted to read out. So one is from Dawn, and she was suggesting something that I've done before. And so the way she worded it was, maybe do a printout of a few select gaping holes and show them what it is and explain the context. And so what I did at one place is I called it a risk acceptance sign off document, which I made up, and I put it on company letterhead. It looked really good. And there
Yeah.
was a whole bunch of things that were wrong that everyone kept refusing to fix. And they're like literally keeping me up at night. I was like, this is going to be bad. I'm in charge of security. I'm going to look so bad. And I begged, and no one would do it. And so I just wrote it to the deputy of security and the chief information officer. And I was like, listen, these are the four things, and here's how it could affect the citizens of our country. And I I can't have the authority to sign off on this because I don't have the authority to force people to fix the things, but you two do. And so I need you to sign off that you accept these risks. And the head of security called me. He's like, this is a giant piece of crap. I'm not signing this. This is awful. Why would we not fix these things? I'm like, it's been over 90 days of me literally meeting with the teams and them refusing. He's like, you tell them. Tell them I said. And so I was like, oh, no, this person sent me. And he said they just jump up and they would run and do the thing. And so we got all
Yeah.
the things fixed in like a week and a half. And
Funny what happens when there's some level of accountability, right? On paper.
right. And well, and someone, so I did that at another department and they're like, well, I'm not going to sign this. So then I didn't accept the risk. And I'm like, well, I've officially informed you in writing. And by not signing, but also not taking action, you are accepting the risk. right? Like I've informed you that I've been working my buns off trying really, really, really hard to get people to fix these things, and people are outright refusing. So you're aware of the issue. And if you do nothing, that is you accepting the risk. And they're like, you are a trickster and should have been a lawyer. Um, and then some of them got fixed.
Yeah.
So there's one more comment from Sarah, and then we're gonna have to try to wrap up, which is hard. Um, so the most frustrating thing about sec tool providers is making free features become pricey. It halts a lot of company initiatives that want to scale security practices. We have to keep changing tools and learn how to use them each time. I don't know how to solve that, Sarah. We all got bills to pay. And so sometimes companies make things free for a while and then we change them. Or sometimes we make them cost money and then we make it free later because we realize we actually make way more money from other parts of our product and we can offer this thing for free. And so that's like, I don't know if you have an answer for that, Eric, but it's hard.
Yeah. Anytime, uh, pricing, costs, money's involved, it stirs up a whole lot of emotions, around the spectrum of emotions. In an economy where you have inflation growing as much as it is, at least within the states, yeah, the price changes is fairly common right now. And in fact, one of our vendors just came at us with a price change as well. So, we got that email, and I will admit I threw a little bit of a temper tantrum. It's probably why I have guitars, so I play that to chill myself out. And it's kind of just a reality of the world we live in.
I agree. Also, it's really hard to figure out how much to charge for something. Like when I started We
Yeah.
Hack Purple, trying to figure out like what is a reasonable price? What is the price people will pay? What's the price that people will not pay? Like, am I being ridiculous by charging this? And like, I remember when I first started, I had people write me and they say, "You're not charging enough. I don't like it. I want to pay more."
Hmm.
Because it was $7 a month to join We Hack Purple when we started.
Yeah.
And people were like, so what some of them would do is they would buy one for someone else. And they're like,
Oh,
"Oh, thank you."
that's
Um,
very kind of it.
yeah, it's weird to figure out what a service or a product is worth, and it's really hard because you have competitors charging various prices and they are all over the map, right? And
Oh,
it's like
yeah. I had someone once tell me that, you found the right price point when 50% of your prospects say no, thank you, over price. And so that just kind of blew my mind, but there's some MBA logic behind it. But that's my way of saying it's kind of feels like a guessing game sometimes.
I know that's exact. So if you need to know how much to ask for your product, don't ask us because we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I'm good at security, I'm just not good at that.
There's another team I depend on for that.
I know, right? But going back to what this whole thing was about, Eric, what would be a key takeaway that you wish that people would have from this webinar? Like a thing that they could take forward and think about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for me, fixing the unintended consequence of DevOps, which is pushing vulnerabilities faster to production, requires two key elements. The first one is around people, right? Change the culture to make security a daily part of your workflow. Right? And we talked about a number of ways that you could do that. The second thing you need is around your technology. Have technology that is built for the world that we live in today, in attempting to solve the real challenges that we face today, producing results fast. And we talked about the various criteria of that. So if you have the right skills and you have the right technologies producing the data, it should feed, and then you should be able to measure progress. If you're looking for ways to measure, here's three great ones. First one, increase software delivery performance. Second one, increase in remediation rates. Third, decrease in the number of vulnerabilities that are being introduced in your software over time. You can present that to somebody, you're definitely saving the organization money and reducing risk.
Oh my God, that's so good. Now I have to think of a follow-up. So I'm going to ask you another question while I think of something that's half as good. So if people want to learn more about you and your company, where could they learn more? Or how could they follow your activities?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll be brutally honest. We're a small company. We don't have a whole ton of activities, but I am speak a lot for my customers, and I often speak for folks that are not my customers internally within the organizations. So if you want to find out more, you go to our website, infraretsecurity.com. You can email me directly, Eric, ERIC, at infraretsecurity.com. just drop me a note. Like I said, happy to do sort of presentations and these sort of webinars internally with you all if you find the topics interesting.
Awesome. Okay, so my key takeaway is so we talked about people, process, and tools. And I would say that we need to invest in our people. And I feel that training and knowledge transfer. So this could be job shadowing. It doesn't have to be something you pay for, but investing in your people so that they learn all the new things, they feel comfortable with all the stuff they're doing. They have the knowledge to solve the problems because you've done job shadowing or mentoring or training, or like there's so many things. And then also be nice to your people by getting them tools they like. A lot of times when I do AppSec consulting, the devs are just like, why are you being so mean to me, making me use this 20-year-old tool that's garbage? So be nice to your people by helping them choose the tool and invest in them by training them. Those would be my takeaways, Eric. So I'm Tanya Janca from Rate Security, and I'm here with Eric from Infrared. And I guess it's time to say goodbye. I'm so bad at this. I'm bad at saying goodbye, Eric.
Uh, but well, from my end, it was an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us.
Absolutely.
Okay, until next time, bye everyone.